If you find yourself saying, I won't enjoy something without drinking, that's where you have to take a moment and say, why? Non-alcoholic brands of this world have not done the due diligence yet to educate the public about what they actually are. From a realistic standpoint, there is a business aspect to this. You need to offer options to keep your sales up. It's about making sure that everyone has a choice. And I think that that's really important in society, is that everyone has a choice.
Welcome to The Upward Spiral, so the podcast where we explore how small shifts in mindset, habits, and choices can lead to extraordinary transformations. I'm your host, Michelle O'Brien, and in today's episode, we are diving into a topic that's reshaping social culture, and that is inclusive drinking. If you've ever wondered what it truly means to create spaces where everyone feels welcome, whether they drink or not, or if you're curious about how to elevate alcohol-free moments in your life, this conversation is for you. You'll hear from someone who's at the forefront of the movement. He's an award-winning mixologist and a beverage expert who's not just mixing drinks, he's changing the game entirely. He's worked with top-tier brands, led global training programs, and is the founder of the Continuous Beverage Solutions, where he's helping businesses reimagine drinking culture. Please can I welcome to the podcast, Chris Cardone. Chris, how are you doing today?
I am wonderful, Michelle. How are you?
I am great. I'm honestly so excited to talk to you, particularly just with kind of the innovation that's happening where you are in this space. I feel like you're really at the forefront and really pushing maybe this industry forward. So really excited to have you here.
Thank you. Yeah, I find that through research and watching on social media and things of that nature, it seems like the UK/London market and New York are the forefronts, with a little bit of pockets here and there. Derek Brown's doing some good things down in DC, but overall, it seems like those are the two major markets kind of creating this push.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm from the UK originally, and when I go home to visit, I'm always astounded at how far it's come, given how aggressive the drinking culture was, particularly for me growing up. It's always amazing.
Yeah, I think that mirrors my experience. I think that, growing up in the 80s, 90s, even early 2000s, it's a very different planet than it was back then, when you think about the culture and society's views on alcohol versus society's views and the culture that's being reshaped today.
Yeah, it's wild, actually, the difference. I moved to Asia 11 years ago, and I've been in Singapore for just over 10 years. And I found it very different here because, more than half the population don't drink. And some of that's for religious reasons, some of that's because genetically it doesn't suit them, or it kind of doesn't work with them. And so, there isn't that kind of same culture that we maybe have in the West. And I think maybe that's why, Singapore and Asia are a little bit slow on kind of, being more inclusive in a bar environment.
Just a cultural thing, right? It's when you
Yeah.
think about how society creates pressures about alcohol across the board. It's not like my business and my career has been 25 years in the restaurant and beverage hospitality industry, but that doesn't change if you work in marketing, or if you work in finance, or if you work in almost any other industry. You're still pressured in some way, shape, or form to imbibe some sort of alcoholic drink. You even think about how much alcohol is influenced in holidays, get-togethers, events. It's always involved. And so when you juxtaposition your situation being in Singapore versus Western culture, where it is sort of bombarding you at all times, there's obviously going to be a reaction, right? Like anything, you equal and opposite reactions, right? So no matter what Western culture you live in, if you're bombarded by this message of drink, 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 at some point there is going to be an opposite reaction to that. And I think that's what we're seeing today. And I don't think it's a 45-year-old white male like me saying, hey, everybody, let's change the culture. It seems to be coming from, at least the data is suggesting that it's coming from the Gen Z and the millennial generation who's driving this change. And I think about when I was 21, 22, 23, my relationship with alcohol was so vastly different than what I see 20-year-olds having now. I think if I told a bunch of 22-year-olds at a table in a restaurant about my 22-year-old drinking days, I feel like they would look at me befuddled, right? They would be like, why would you do that? Why would you drink like that? And I'm not saying all 22-year-olds, but what seems to be a very large section of that sort of generation is saying, I don't have that relationship with alcohol, and I never have. They don't see alcohol the same way that I did almost 25 years ago.
Oh, completely. And maybe let's talk about that. Maybe let's go back in time and talk about kind of your relationship with alcohol and the early days of bartending.
So, all right, I mean, when I think about it, my relationship with alcohol probably started like most people, right? You're a high school kid or a college kid and you're drinking here and there. And I wouldn't say most, I don't want to say everybody, because obviously everyone has a different relationship with alcohol. So it's hard to ever try to box in a situation. But I would say the majority of people who experiment with drinking at a young age don't ever really have too many habits that are formed and are not creating situations that are detriment to their health or relationships or work or anything like that. I mean, it seems to be too early at that point. When I was in college, I think is when I started really binge drinking and really drinking heavily, because that was the culture of college. You went to frat parties and you did keg stands and you used funnels and you would just drink heavier than you did when you were in high school. And it was more about having, a party in someone's basement. So when I look at my career, which started at the age of 20 behind a bar, I feel like that's when my relationship with alcohol probably changed, when it became sort of an identity, if you will, where I wasn't just someone who drank here and there. I was the bartender making everyone drinks, and I had to fit that sort of, we'll call it a classification or an identity of someone who can hold their alcohol, who can drink heavily and stay with the group and, be that sort of larger than life figure. And so you start to drink and drink and drink and drink and drink and drink more and more frequently. The quantity increases, and it sort of, without you even realizing it, I would say it envelops you into that lifestyle of being sort of, let's say, quote unquote, the party animal sort of lifestyle.
I bartended as well for many years, like all through kind of university and yeah, just kind of my late teens and all through university, and I loved it. It was just such a social, fun environment. You were almost popular because you were feeding everybody drinks. And I worked in a lot of kind of very laid back bars where we would have a few drinks while we were working, and it was good time. It was good times.
It starts as good times for sure, and some people, I think, keep that level and they go home and they don't drink anymore and they go to bed and that's the end of the day for them. And then other people, they continue that night out somewhere else, and eventually, again, it sort of morphs into a unhealthy relationship. But yeah, I mean, for me, like going back into my childhood, I had a very, like a sort of a second best feeling about my life when I was younger, because my sister, who's 5 years older than me, was very successful in school. And then she graduated and went to a very successful university and then graduated with honors there and went on to big things in the finance world and married the CFO of a company and, the 3 kids and the dog and the white picket fence and living in Notting Hill. And it's when you watch that and you're 5 years younger than that, I think a lot of times you don't feel like you can compete with that energy, or you can compete with that sort of attention that you get from your parents or family members, and you take on the other role to get attention, which is the role of second best or clown or entertainer or whatever you want to call it. And so I think that when you become a bartender, a lot of times you'll find yourself all of a sudden in a different role than you're used to, where, like you said, you're sort of the everyone's best friend because you're the one feeding them drinks. And so in my own personal experience, when I was 20, 21, 22, the idea of having random girls coming up to me, giving me their phone number, saying, "Hey, let's go out sometime," was new territory for me. And, for every single guy in the bar wanting to be my friend and know my name and, throwing me cash and feeling like I was connected in a weird way to everyone in that place. Again, it was a different identity that I had never understood or experienced before. So, like most things, and I always think about the term rock star and how silly it is that we use that term for everything, but you sort of become a rock star of the bar. And so to take on that identity, I think a lot of times you end up taking on all of that rock star identity, which is drugs and sometimes alcohol, or I should say, excuse me, alcohol and sometimes drugs even kind of becomes part of that identity. Now, I never did drugs, but alcohol certainly became a part of my identity. And for a long, long time, I think was my identity of the heavy drinker and the guy who could party until the end of the night and be the last one standing, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. And at what point did that change?
I would say when I quit drinking. So I I had a couple different scenarios where I was having blackouts that would last hours. And during those blackouts, I would have different kinds of hallucinations where I was on like a different plane and not really in touch with reality. Now, you heard about Ernest Hemingway and his whole pink elephants thing. And obviously, there's some form of chemical reaction or allergy or something that I have chemically that alcohol doesn't jive with. Now, the problem was that I didn't have any sort of consistency in that. So my first one and my second one were years apart, and there was no specific alcohol that I had, no specific amount of drinks that I had, no consistency where I said, oh, this is why these things are happening. There was always another reason in my head and another justification in my head for why this was happening versus that it was anything to do with alcohol. So on my third one, which was back in 2015, I had a very small amount of drinks. I mean, to be specific, it was 2 beers and a shot, which for me at the time was like the beginning of my night. It certainly wasn't a heavy drinking night in any way. And I proceeded to have like a 5-hour blackout where I had visions of zombies coming to kill me and the people I was with. Woke up the next morning to find out secondhand about all of this. And it got me to a place where I was starting to become uncomfortable about it. And I didn't know it was alcohol. I can say almost 10 years later that I've never had another episode, so I know it was going now, looking back at it, but at the time I didn't know. So I said to myself, all right, the one consistency between these three things is alcohol is somehow involved. So I said to myself, I'm going to take a year off from drinking. And I texted a friend of mine and I told him about what happened. And I said, I'm going to take a year off from drinking. And he texted me back and said, I don't think you can. And what really bothered me was that I agreed with him. I didn't think I could either, deep down. And so then I felt a little bit of that, let's call it a inspiration flame that went off in me. And I said, all right, now I really am going to do this. And so I got to about 9 months. I found my comfort zone. I was kind of going through my everyday and dealing with all of the stuff that comes with that, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And one of my coworkers who was sober, who was a server at the restaurant I was working at, came up to me during service, walked up to me at the service bar, and we weren't very busy at the time. And he said, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? I said, yeah, of course. What would you like to know? And he said, what do you do in 3 months when you get to your year? do you go back to being like Mr. Crazy party animal drinker guy? And without even hesitating, I just looked at him and I said, no, I'm never going to drink again. And I didn't even think about it. It just came out. And I kind of caught myself and he kind of looked at me funny. And I had one of those moments, like an aha moment. And I shook my head. I said, yeah, that's it. I'm not going to ever drink again. And I never have. I'm going to hit 10 years this May.
Wow, 10 years. It's huge.
Yeah.
Congratulations. And I
Thank you.
love how it was like an automatic response. It was like sort of switch had been flicked, you know?
Flip. Yep. Best way to describe it.
For me, it took a time. It took me a year to say the words, I'm done. You know, I don't want to drink. But I think inside I knew. I just was really scared about people's reaction. And I think I wanted to do a year to know that I could do it as well. Like I didn't want to voice it and then feel like I was letting myself or everybody down if it didn't work out.
Yeah.
I think it does take a bit of time.
For sure. And to be fully transparent, it was not the first time I said I'm going to take a break from drinking or I'm going to stop drinking or woke up and said, what am I doing? I got to do something about this. That was years of doing that before this moment. There was, again, years of different occurrences where I'd wake up in the morning and say, oh my God, what am I doing? I gotta change. I gotta do something else. But I've used the term the whirlwind as sort of an analogy for the lifestyle and the choices that we make when it comes to alcohol. And I like that analogy because when you think about a whirlwind, right, it's swirling around and it sucks you in. There was so many times where I would go to work the next morning or the next day after being hungover and having a really heavy night saying, I'm not drinking anymore like that. And 12 hours later, I'm back in a bar having shots, having drinks, where I wake up the next day and say, oh my God, again? And so again, not to try to act or insinuate that this was like the first time I ever said, I'm not going to drink. And then I just poof, it happened. It was years in the making.
And it must have been hard going back to work, like working in the environment where you're just around it all of the time. Like that takes a different kind of strength.
That was kind of weird because I had been tending bar at that time for 15 years. So there wasn't a physical issue with being around alcohol for me. I also didn't have an uncomfortability but being behind a bar and being around alcohol because I didn't always drink behind the bar when I'd work. There would be occasional spots that I'd worked at that I would, where we'd have that sort of bartender's handshake where you stop working and everybody does a shot and gets back to work and stuff like that. But for me, bartending itself was always work and it was always trying to be professional about it. It was always the social aspect of drinking that came after work or outside of work that I felt like I was getting in trouble with. So having said that, there was massive insecurity that came through this decision of whether or not I could continue to be a bartender. Because when back in 2015, the word sober bartender, I mean, that was not a thing. And I could probably count on one hand the amount of sober bartenders that existed in 2015 when I had made this decision. So going back then, the question more for me was not, can I bartend without drinking? It was, can I bartend still? Can I still do what I love to do for a living if I don't drink? And then I found more of an issue or an uncomfortability going out after work with my coworkers more than I did going to work. I was able to compartmentalize pretty fast, saying, okay, this is my job. I love my job. I don't want to leave my job. So I have to figure this out fast. So go to work, don't drink, go home. And where I found the uncomfortability was when 6, 7, 8 coworkers after work were saying they were going to go out to the bar. I should come with them because they wanted to invite me. And now I had to make that decision of the FOMO aspect of, do I go or do I not go, right? Like the Clash says. And so it was when I got to the bar and I wasn't drinking, that's where the uncomfortable feelings started showing up. It really wasn't at work.
I can imagine, and I completely relate. It's it's funny. Some of the things that you think would be hard are actually easier, and sometimes you build things up in your head as well. Did you take a break from socializing and then come back to it, or did you just try to push through?
A little bit of both. I I remember vividly the first time I went out. So I was working at a place in Tribeca in New York, and the bar two doors down from where I was working at the time was sort of my after work hangout. And again, you said mindset, and it's totally what it is, right? You create a mindset for this stuff. So I remember saying to myself, I can go to work, I can do this, I can keep working in this career, and I just won't drink. And my mind was made up about that. So that felt a little easy. If you know me, you know I'm pretty stubborn. When I say I'm going to do something, I do it. Now, going out, I didn't have that mindset. So I got to the bar and I remember feeling like an overwhelmingly massive level of uncomfortability, but not so much insecurity as much as a weird feeling of this isn't fun anymore and I don't want to be here. And so that caught me off guard. And I remember, like I said, vividly thinking after about 15 minutes, I got to get out of here. I don't want to be here anymore. And that threw me for a loop because I didn't understand where those feelings were coming from. And so, doing a lot of research over the course of my first year of sobriety and understanding how physiological alcohol can affect us and how it affects our brain, our all of our endorphins and all of the dopamine and serotonin and all of those things, how much that has a massive effect on things, I learned. And when I talk about this publicly, I always kind of use the idea of going to the gym because I think it's an easy analogy for people to grasp, which is if you work out every single day for 10 years and you get to a comfortability level that you can bench press 200 pounds, and then all of a sudden for 6 months, you don't go to the gym. The next time you go 6 months and 1 day later, if you pick up that 200-pound dumbbell or barbell, and try to bench press that, it's going to feel like an impossibility. Something you were comfortable with 6 months ago, you can't do anymore. So when you think about alcohol in that sort of level, that everyone has a baseline happiness level, right? Some people are a 6, some people are a 7, some people are an 8. And even if you win the mega millions, or if someone really close to you dies, over the course of time, you will gravitate back to that natural number that is your happiness level overall. That's why people that win the lottery eventually become sort of stabilized with where they were before they win the lottery. It doesn't stay with that exalted feeling. So if you are, let's say, a baseline 7, and all of a sudden you become a massive alcoholic and you drink all the time, your levels of dopamine spikes and your euphoria levels are so high so often that your baseline kind of goes up to an 8 or an 8.5 or a 9. So when you take that alcohol away, you come back down to a 7. But a 7 doesn't feel like a 7 anymore. It feels like a 2. So all of a sudden you have all these massive, horrible feelings of depression and sort of a feeling of no man's land. You sort of feel like alone. And all those horrible, sort of uncomfortable, insecure feelings are amplified to such a level that it's like trying to pick up that 200-pound weight. You just, all of a sudden, I can't do this and I don't know how to do it anymore. And just like weight training, you have to build back up. It's the same thing. So I remember going out to a bar and feeling so massively uncomfortable. But 10 years later, now I can go out to a bar and sit at a bar for 3 or 4 hours with people and it doesn't have any negative impact on me at all. It feels nice to be out with a group of people, socializing and catching up with people. So it's a journey, just like every part of it.
I completely understand everything that you're saying. And, for those that are listening, that baseline, it doesn't happen after a month after drinking. It takes months and months, 6 months, a year, 2 years of not drinking. But what happens is that like a baseline slowly starts to stabilize, and a 7, like you said, a 7 will feel like a 7, but you'll get a lot of joy. You start to find joy in other things and happiness in smaller things, and things that before when you were drinking, you didn't feel them in the same way. And as time passes, it takes time. You can't just give up alcohol for a month and expect that to happen. It takes time. And I think you have to work on yourself a little bit, but it's like slowly your head is coming out of the clouds and you're really seeing things and you're seeing like the value and the joy in the smaller things to the point where you realize maybe how masked it was before. And it, without sounding really cheesy, it's magic when that happens. It's brilliant.
Again, it's everyone's relationship is different, right? There are lots of people who, for example, they'll say, I want to go sit outside and watch the sunset. And they'll do that. And it brings them certain joy because they get to watch nature. There are other
Yeah.
people who say, I'm going to go outside and watch the sunset with a glass of wine. They finish their glass of wine. They don't have any more to drink. They go inside and they're filled with a happiness level because they had a glass of wine and they watch sunset. Then there are other people who say, I'm going to go watch the sunset, but I need, that's the key word here, I need my glass of wine to do so. In which case, if I don't have my glass of wine, I won't enjoy the sunset. And I think that's where my message comes in, is that my goal in talking about this so publicly so often is that it'll give people an opportunity to take a moment, or an inspiration to take a moment and think, does my relationship with alcohol align with the relationship I want to have with alcohol? If you find yourself saying, I won't enjoy something without drinking, that's where you have to take a moment and say, why? And so I fell into that same category many times, where I would go to a sports event or a holiday or a party, or, I mean, I can go on and on and on with this, how many different times I attached alcohol to something. And the next day usually involved me saying, oh my God, that was so much fun. But if you asked me where the fun was, I didn't really have an answer. I really couldn't identify it. Now, look at the situation. I don't have alcohol involved. And those scenarios where maybe I go to a sports event, or maybe I take my kids to do something, or I go with my partner to do something, or I go on vacation, or I sit outside and watch the sunset, whatever the scenario will be, I find myself now filled with a joy and a presence that I didn't have. So now I remember the moment more clearly, and I can actually identify the moments of happiness or the moments of pleasure that gave me, while with alcohol involved, I said I had fun, but if I really introspectively looked at it, I couldn't point to anything specifically. And a lot of times I didn't even really remember it. So there are times where I can say, oh, I went to see this team play. No recollection of the game, no recollection of much of anything, especially when I think about American football. And I'm saying that because of who I'm talking to right now. I want to be cognizant of the word football. If I went to an American football game and we tailgated beforehand, yeah, I had fun tailgating because I remembered all of that part. The game is a blur. And so I went to a game that I don't even really remember. And so now I think about it, I could do the same exact scenario. I could still tailgate, and then I can go to the game and I can remember all of it. And so again, it's just a weird relationship that you have. And like you said, it does not come in a month. And sometimes it doesn't come for a year or more. It takes everyone a different amount of time to find that comfort level, to find that inner work. And it all depends on how much you want to work on it. That's like anything else, right? It's how much effort you put in is what you get out.
Chris, all of that was so beautifully put. And I'm sure so many people feel inspired and relieved by what you're saying. And I think so many people who are on a similar path will relate completely. I just like to shift the conversation a little bit, and let's talk about inclusive drinking. And we can talk a little bit about the work that you're doing as well. But what does inclusive drinking mean?
For me, the word inclusive is from the word included, right? And I think that when you think about putting that word in front of anything, it's about making sure that everyone has a choice. And I think that that's really important in society, is that everyone has a choice. And when it comes to alcohol, it is always surrounded by I shouldn't say that. Let me start over with that. When it comes to an alcohol, many times it's involving some form of a community situation. Now, you go back, we'll say 200 years, just to be safe with that number. Church was our version of community meeting, right? That's where everyone went. Whatever church it was, doesn't matter, whatever religion it is. Religion was how people got together, congregated, saw the people that they cared about, saw the people in their community, talked to their neighbors. It was where we socialized. Our times are changing. And so now I would argue that restaurants and bars for the past however many years has become the new church. And that's where most people socialize with people they love, people they care about, people they're friends with. And they get an opportunity to have a community interaction. When you think about that, anyone who drinks kind of has that opportunity. But anyone who doesn't drink, or anyone who doesn't want to drink on a particular evening or in general, is sort of excluded from that community. And so when I quit drinking back in 2015, there weren't many options on the table. The Seedlips and the Lyres and the Aploses and the Everleafs and all those brands didn't exist. So for me, my choice was basically two choices. Well, I guess three choices. One was don't go. Now, don't go is easy, but mentally it's hard because FOMO is a real thing. And it's not always just about seeing people you like and want to talk to, but a lot of times it's networking. And at the end of the day, networking, whether you want to believe it or not, is a massively important thing for professional growth. You do not get to where you want to get professionally if you don't network. Just the truth. You know, I've found in my 45 years that it's not all about hard work. It's about who you know more than the hard work. When you take alcohol out and you say, okay, I'm just not going to go because I'm not comfortable, you have a massive problem there because you now have not only FOMO, but you're actually really missing out on professional growth opportunities. So that's part of it. Another part of it is you can go and do what I did, which was have a tonic water. And I would ask for that tonic water with a lime. And a lot of times I would get a pint glass full of tonic water that was mostly flat. And usually the soda gun syrup was out. So it really was like club soda flavored tonic water or the other way around. Sorry, tonic flavored club soda. And so I would walk around with that pint glass and every single person that saw me knew I wasn't drinking. I might as well have put a sign on my forehead that said not drinking tonight. And then it became question and answer time with Chris, where it was, why aren't you drinking? And I always laugh and I say, thank God I'm not female, because if I was, I'd have to answer if I was pregnant to everybody. But at the end of the day, the option was stay home or stand there with a glass of tonic water in your hand. The third option was to put your hands in your pockets, which is no different than having a tonic water in a pint glass. You're still answering all those questions. You're still feeling excluded. And everyone around you is sort of treating you either like you're weird or with kid gloves like you're fragile. So you fast forward now and you think about what is out there option-wise now. And to answer your question on a gigantic tangent, I apologize, is that inclusive drinking is about having options for whatever your situation may be. So if you don't want to drink for the evening, or you don't want to drink in general, or you already had a cocktail and you want to now zebra stripe and not have another cocktail, then it gives you the option of having a non-alcoholic beer or a non-alcoholic wine, a non-alcoholic cocktail, or if you want to get even more geeky bartending world, you could also have a low ABV cocktail or something that still has alcohol but doesn't have the same strength as a martini. You have options. And at the end of the day, that's what inclusivity is. It's being able to make your own choice for your situation without having to answer from every person in the place about why you're not drinking, or have to deal with the peer pressure of it's okay, you can just have one, it won't matter, or it's okay to just have one because it's just one, or how come you're not the same as you used to be, or all of the feelings that come up with all that stuff, I know that I have definitely lost friendships with people who are heavy drinkers. And 10 years later, I wouldn't say I'm bothered by it, but I miss them and I miss those friendships with those people. But I had to make the decision, and the decision for me was very easy, that our lives and our habits and our hobbies were not going to mingle. And there was certainly uncomfortability, probably on both sides, but for me, it was the uncomfortability of watching that kind of culture in front of me, being that I was not trying to be part of that culture. And I'm sure there's a level of uncomfortability on the other side of the table too, where if someone is a heavy drinker and they're sitting with someone that they used to drink heavily with, who no longer drinks, it probably puts them in an uncomfortable level too. Not only because maybe they feel a sense of guilt themselves, but also a sense of maybe a little misunderstanding about, they don't understand why you're making those choices and they don't necessarily agree with those choices. So you just sort of lose out on those relationships, and you have to make that choice of, some relationships have to go and some can stay. But I think, again, to give you the long-winded answer, I think at the end of the day, inclusivity is that you don't feel forced to do anything you don't want to do.
It's all of everything that you said there are kind of around the, not having to answer to anyone. You can have a drink that looks like what everybody else is doing, you feeling included. But also for me, it's like, it's an elevation. Like, you get to have something that's really sophisticated. That's not like, I don't drink fizzy drinks. Like, I don't drink sodas and high sugar drinks. I don't want a fruit juice. That's not what I wouldn't drink that in a normal situation. Why would I go and drink that in a bar? So if the bar isn't serving like a sophisticated non-alcoholic alternative, ideally that's low sugar, I'm just going to choose soda water. And so, it's part of it is also just choice and like having something that, actually tastes good and is sophisticated.
And I think that's a major shift in the industry now, is that because there are these great non-alcoholic spirits out there and great non-alcoholic wines, great non-alcoholic beers, you don't have to answer the questions anymore, because your cocktail, your beer, your wine looks exactly the same as everyone else's. You do get to have the opportunity to put your hand up with your drink in hand and cheers with everyone at the table. You don't feel left out of that. You don't have to have a glass of water with your meal and not have the opportunity to elevate your meal, to accentuate the food you're eating, and have the cocktail or the wine or the beer amplify the flavors, which is what we like to do, right? Food pairing with wine, cocktails, it's all about amplification of flavor. So all of the opportunities that non-alcoholic spirits and wine and beers bring to the table is the part of the inclusivity, which is what you were just speaking on.
Absolutely. And you mentioned something, zebra stripes. I don't think that's a kind of a term that we've heard much on this podcast before. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's a term that it's when you think about a zebra and you think about its stripes, it rotates, right? White to black, black to white. I think there is some science about that. It's not actually that color and that we're seeing that, but we're not going to get involved in that. I'll talk about that with Bill Nye, the science guy, one day. But zebra striping, the idea behind it is that it's for people who kind of interchange their NA cocktails and their cocktails throughout the actual same evening. So maybe I go to the bar and I do start with a martini. And then instead of having a second martini, I switch to a non-alcoholic cocktail. Then maybe after that cocktail, I go back to a glass of wine with my main course. And then instead of having a digestif, I have a non-alcoholic something as my dessert. So you're back and forth from alcohol to non-alcohol. And when you think about that over the course of a full dinner, let's say that dinner ideally is 2 hours, you've only had 2 drinks over 2 hours then. So you're drinking in a much more quote unquote responsible manner. And I don't mean that in the legal term of alcohol blood level. I mean that as a more responsible way where you're not going to feel those negative impacts the same the next morning, during your sleep cycle, all of those parts that you would if you have had 4 alcoholic cocktails. So that's the idea behind zebra stripe. I love the term. I think it's a very it's a very cool way to describe something that is it's an understandable metaphor, an understandable analogy.
Yeah, me too. And I always kind of describe like non-alcoholic alternatives, and not just for people who are sober. In fact, I think it's something like 15% of people who drink non-alcoholics are completely sober. And again, it's for anyone who doesn't want to drink for that drink.
Yeah.
It can be that simple.
Yeah, I echo what you said. I agree. And I heard the same number. I heard it the reverse version of that, where 85% of people who drink non-alcoholics still drink alcohol on certain times. And again, I understand and I'm sympathetic to the fact that I am not by any means the majority when it comes to relationships with alcohol. There is the 80-20 rule, and I am part of the 20. And I would say the 20 splits 10 and 10, right? So you have 10% of the public, maybe like me, who don't drink at all or have no relationship with alcohol. 10% of the public are heavy, heavy drinkers. The other 80% are managing their situations. And so I think the zebra striping concept falls into that category of that 80%. And I think that's where a lot of the non-alcoholic sales are coming from.
Definitely. Like what are some of the misconceptions that you encounter about non-alcoholic drinks, and how do you address them?
I think the biggest one is from an ignorance standpoint. I don't mean that. I know the word ignorant has a very negative connotation, but I don't mean it in a negative way. I just think that the non-alcoholic brands of this world have not done the due diligence yet to educate the public about what they actually are, how they're actually made, and why they cost what they cost. I think that that is part one of the process of really making this so-called trend stick, is that the general public needs to understand and be educated more to the non-alcoholic spirit industry. So if you asked 100 people, explain to me what a non-alcoholic spirit is, I bet you 99 of them can't tell you. And so that's a major gap, and that's a major problem. So I think the biggest thing is that the majority of people believe it's flavored water. And so the understanding of, you want me to pay you the same amount, I'd argue it should be the same amount, as a regular cocktail, is insane. And if you come from the idea of it's flavored water, yeah, I have no argument there. You're right. That would be insane. For me to say, here's some mint flavored water, pay me $18 for it. You have a point. I get it. So I think the first step is to really educate people and have them better understand what a non-alcoholic spirit is. And like I said, how it's made. So once you get that part done, then it's about understanding that that non-alcoholic spirit has to be used not in an identical plug and play situation as a regular cocktail, but with the same intention. Think about the glass it's going into. Think about the other ingredients that you're putting in there and how they're going to amplify that non-alcoholic spirit. And my background has always been restaurants. I very rarely have worked in cocktail bars. I have a couple stints here and there over the 25 years, but 95% of what I've done in my life in this career has been in a restaurant setting. So I've always worked with what's in the kitchen. And that's, for me, living in New York, I get 4 seasons. So I've always enjoyed the ability to take the seasonality aspect to my cocktails. So if the kitchen has mint that just got in season and it's perfect, that's what I want to use. And if it's time for sugar snap peas, let's use that. And if it's time for cinnamon and baking spices because it's wintertime, let's do that. But it's always mirroring what's on the menu food-wise in some way, whether it's comparing and contrasting, whatever, that's a different conversation. So understanding how to take flavors and amplify your cocktail, how to make sure it has mouthfeel and it feels like a cocktail should and not flabby and sort of watered down, to make sure the garnish looks beautiful and creates a function like a cocktail does. So the idea is that you're not just paying for what's in the glass, you're paying for the whole experience. And that gives you the opportunity to have that inclusive environment where it really does amplify your experience at a bar or a restaurant.
I've lucky enough to kind of we've got some phenomenal restaurants here in Singapore, and my favorite ones to go to either have an inclusive menu, so They have got foolproof, half-proof, and zero-proof cocktails that are all together on one cocktail menu. The non-alcoholic cocktails are not shoved in the back with the juices and the so again, you're kind of getting the same experience with the menu. Or going to places where the barman has a very simple cocktail menu, but will make you anything that you want, and being able to kind of say, look, I love ginger and spice, but nothing too sweet, no added sugar, citrus flavors, and to get a unique drink every time that's alcohol free, but is just so elevated and special. And I always feel so included and so seen, and it's worth every penny, so we talk about the money and people not getting it and people thinking, why am I paying so much? But there's so much craft that goes into making a really good non-alcoholic cocktail.
And I think there's two parts to unpack there. There is the part about understanding the value to your guest, which is that I'm in the same position as you. I can go to a bar or a restaurant and get a glass of water and have a meal, and it's fine. It's fine. Or I can have an experience where I go there and I look at a menu and there are options for me, someone who doesn't drink, that are exciting, where I say, ooh, I actually really want to try that. And then it's delivered and it's executed well. And I say, oh my God, that's really good. And that's an experience that I don't get to have very often. And I want to change that. I want to make it so that everyone can have that experience regularly. And it's not a dime a dozen. So I want to make sure that everybody has that situation so that it is common and not a outlier trend. I want it to be something that we all assume is just normal. And then the other part of this to unpack is the value that it gives to the establishment. Because we haven't really talked about that yet, but if you're a bar owner, a restaurant owner, a hotel owner, whatever the case may be, and you're looking at your numbers, if you're like most people, they're down. And they're down if you're not staying with what's really going on here, which is that there's a large movement of people who don't drink alcohol or drink less. And so you need to be proactive on this. You don't want to be one of the late adapters to this, because you're going to find yourself in a bad financial position to do that. You need to offer options to keep your sales up. So I think about dry January and I think about the amount of people who don't drink this month. It's a real thing. And so if you put your arms, cross your arms or put them over your eyes and your ears and you say, I'm not going to deal with this. This isn't a real thing. And then you look at your sales in January versus December or November or October, and you see how down they are. It's because you didn't act appropriately to the situation. All you have to do is have some non-alcoholic cocktail options, and you will see that people like myself, or people who are, like we talked about, zebra striping or just don't want to have a drink that night, they will order those drinks. They will sell. And when they sell, your numbers will climb. Or, I'm not suggesting that they'll reach the same limits that they may in December or November when it's party central and everyone's having family and corporate and other kind of events that are at bars and restaurants, but they won't dramatically fall like they will if you don't have any options. So to use a real life example, if I'm working in a restaurant and I serve a table of 4 and those 4 people get 2 rounds of, let's just say for easy math, $20 cocktails, that's $80 per round times 2. That's $160 that just went into the restaurant sales-wise. Now you times that by all the tables in the restaurant, it's a lot of money. If I don't have an option, those people now sit there and they say, well, I'm going to have a water. Or even at best, I'm going to have a Coke, which is $3 or $4. I haven't had a Coke in 20 years, so I couldn't tell you what it costs. But point made is that you're losing out on all of that money times all of those tables, times all of the days of the week, month, year. It adds up really, really fast. And then on top of even that server at that table of people drinking water is going to say, those people are not spending any money. And I know we want to believe that everybody that works in the hospitality industry has a gigantic heart that pounds and says, I want to make sure everybody that comes in here has the best time ever. But the reality is that the majority of people who work in the restaurant and bar industry are transient. This is not their passion. This is not what they want to do for their career. And they want to make money at their job. And the way you make money is on tips. So if you have a table of 4 people who have a $160 smaller check, I guarantee they are not going to get the same service, the same attention, or the same intention from that server as they would if they were pounding back cocktails and bottles of wine. It's just the way it is. I'm not going to fight City Hall on this, and I'm not going to preach that it's going to be any different. From a realistic standpoint, there is a business aspect to this. We want to make sure the restaurants and bars are making money. We want to make sure the servers are still making money. And we want to make sure the guests are walking out happy. And one last note, as someone who doesn't drink, if I go into a bar and I see a cocktail menu, and on the side of the cocktail menu, I'm not saying it has to be alcohol, non-alcoholic, alcoholic, non-alcoholic. It can be part separated. It can just say non-alcoholic cocktails. And if I have options, I'm not there to bargain shop. I am not looking at myself saying, well, I only want to spend $12 tonight instead of $18. So I'm going to have the non-alcoholic cocktail. I'd say if you ask 100 people, maybe one would say they're doing that. All the other people who are ordering that non-alcoholic cocktail are ordering it for a reason that doesn't have to do with money. So if I have to pay $18 for a great drink that doesn't have alcohol in it, I'm fine doing that as long as it's great. That's the one caveat. I just want it to be great. And if I do, I'm happy too. And I don't have a problem spending that money. So it's a win-win-win situation if everyone walks out happy.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always saying to premises, you're leaving money on the table. Because I'm just going to drink water, and I'm going to take my husband home early because I'm not sitting around watching him drink a glass of wine when I'm drinking water. So as soon as that meal finishes, we're out of there. You're literally leaving money on the table.
I would even argue that many people nowadays are savvy enough to look before they go. So, I think about, I have a very personal situation with my partner is both gluten-free and dairy-free. So she's savvy enough that she will go on websites. Like, let's say we're going on vacation somewhere and we're trying to find where to go to dinner. She looks on their websites to see if there are options for her. Why would she want to go to a French restaurant if she has a dairy allergy, right? It's a good example of it. So you do the same thing if you don't drink alcohol. There are many people who are savvy enough to go on the website, see if there's options, and if they're not, they just won't go there. That's a real thing, especially with bars. Maybe not restaurants, because restaurants, you're still going there for the food. But even with restaurants, but mostly bars, people are going to look. So if you don't have options, they don't go. So now you're talking about really leaving money on the table because now you're in an empty bar. And let's be real, nobody wants to go to an empty bar.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. And I just want to kind of, before, as we're coming to the end of the conversation, I actually just wanted to step away from the bar and talk about corporate events. So I know that you do a number of corporate events with the Continuous Beverage Solutions. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing there when it comes to kind of inclusive drinking.
Yeah, it's my pride and joy. So I launched this business last year in the ideal world of shifting culture. Now, the idea behind the culture shift for me is a real thing because I've been doing this long enough to remember when we didn't have fresh juice behind a bar. We didn't use jiggers behind the bar. Cocktail menus didn't exist. So I remember watching it happen firsthand, where Dale DeGroff and Julie Reiner and Audrey Saunders and a handful of other people literally, not figuratively, literally changed the way the world thinks about drinking. And it didn't happen overnight. It happened over the course of a decade or so, but they did. They changed it. And I watched cocktail bar after cocktail bar after cocktail bar open up all over the country. And now it's to the point where you get a cocktail menu at Applebee's. You get a jigger pour at almost every bar you walk into. Most bars, not every bar, but most bars use fresh juice. These were not norms 20 years ago. They're norms now. So ideally what I'd like to see is myself hopefully included, we will change the culture again. And we will create an environment where everyone will have a choice when they go in. And going in and having a cocktail menu that has non-alcoholic options will be the norm. Now, to pivot to your question, in the corporate world, I've never worked in the corporate office, but I have worked enough corporate events to know that not everybody wants to get drunk in front of their boss. And so, having said that, what I've always seen and I've always giggled about is that if you have 50 people at that corporate function, one of them, undoubtedly one of them, if not two, will get absolutely blasted at the party and they will stick out like a sore thumb. And it cracks me up to watch it because I'm like, are you out of your mind? Like the boss is literally next to you and you're drunk. Like, why would you put yourself in that position? Now, the other hand, I also see a ton of people order a drink when they get there and hold on to that drink for dear life because they don't want to finish it, but they also don't want to have to order a second drink. So it just sits there and it turns into a glass of whatever it was, filled with ice water that is melted completely down. It's flat, it's gross, but they hold it for the entire time, or maybe get one other drink throughout the entire function because they are cognizant of who's around them. So this falls into that category of inclusivity. Wouldn't it be nice? And I think it's starting to shift where corporate functions are starting to be understanding that not everyone there drinks. And they don't want to create an environment where they can't allow some of their coworkers, employees, whatever the term may be, to be able to even go to the event. They dodge it because it's surrounded by alcohol and they say, I don't drink, I'm not going. So they completely don't come. And now you've excluded a portion of your company, which again is not the best culture builder to not have an environment where everyone that you work with wants to go to something. But then at the same time, if they go there and they have non-alcoholic options, they don't have to hold on to that one drink for dear life. They can drink as much as they want because it doesn't matter. They can have 2, 3, 4, whatever the case may be, try a bunch of different drinks on the menu, have a nice time, and not have to worry about the ramifications of it. And then at the same time, business-wise, it's just, again, I will preface by saying I don't work in a corporate office, but it would seem to me like it would make sense to incorporate that for a business aspect of it too, right? Most corporate events don't take place on Fridays. They take place on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. So you still have to go to the office the next day. So why would I want to take all 50 of my employees and have them drink heavily and then expect them to come in and be efficient the next day? It just doesn't make sense. So it makes more sense to say, let's make sure that there's at least one non-alcoholic option at these events. And that's where I come in. Again, my world is to create really, really good cocktails. And I can't express that enough that there are a lot of people who do corporate events, but not everyone has a cocktail background of making exceptionally good cocktails in corporate events. I've been to enough weddings to know that there are a lot of bad drinks out there. So when you think about different events, and a lot of times the level of cocktail offerings is not something people are thinking about. And I hope that that changes too, where you go to a corporate event and you have a beautifully curated dinner, but the cocktails were just kind of left off. They weren't really thought about, just quote unquote open bar. Again, the idea would be creating an environment where everyone has an option at a high executed level. And now people may not want to drink. And really quick, just to completely, it's sort of a tangent, but it's sort of related. I want to just tell you a quick story. I was at a judge's dinner in Denver last year for a competition I was judging at. And we went out, it was about 8 of us. We have known each other, all of us have known each other for years. So it's almost like a family gathering. And we sat at the table. And as soon as we got there, we sat down and there was a menu placed in front of all of us on our table. And it was a beautiful menu. I want to say it had 10 to 12 cocktails. Looking at it from a bartender perspective, it was incredible. There was so much flavor. There was so much intention. There was so much thought. These drinks looked great. Yet there was no non-alcoholic option. So the server starts to take the orders, finally makes it around to me and says, "Hey, Chris, we know that you don't drink, and we created a beautiful non-alcoholic cocktail that we would like to offer you." And I said, "Sure." And deep down, I knew that the intention there was actually really good, right? They were making sure I was included. The problem was the delivery of it spotlighted me to the other 7 people at the table as you're special. And that's not always the spotlight you want. Now, again, I'm not at that point, I'm 9 years in. I don't care. It bounces off me like nothing. But if I was 6 months in, I might be really uncomfortable with being spotlighted by everybody like that. And then I'd also pivot to kind of coming back to our conversation about corporate, that the other 7 people that had already ordered a cocktail weren't presented with even having a non-alcoholic option. So to me, the way to do that would have been to make a menu with 9 cocktails, 1 non-alcoholic, just put it on there. I would have ordered it just out of curiosity to try it if it looked like that rest of that menu, because I would have ordered any of those cocktails if I drank, because they all looked great. So clearly these people have their chops and know what they're doing. So just make it on the menu. I would have ordered it, and I would argue, I bet you at least one of the other people at that table probably would have ordered it either out of A, curiosity, or B, because they didn't really feel like drinking that night and were sort of socially pressured to just have a cocktail.
Totally. So and I always say, and I've said this a couple of times in this podcast, like I always make sure that I'm the first person to order a drink. And again, it takes a year or two to be kind of brave enough to do this and really be really comfortable in your sobriety or your choices. But I'm always the first one, and I'll pull the waiter over just while everyone's still looking at the menu before anyone has a chance to go, should we get 3 bottles of wine for the table? And I'm always the first one. And I always say, okay, look, what non-alcs have you got? Okay, I'm going to have this one. Does anyone else want a non-alc? And I will guarantee you that half of the table every time will order a non-alc, because all of a sudden you kind of get that, oh God, thank God we don't have to drink tonight. You know, that someone's taken the lead. Everyone goes, okay, that sounds great. I'll have one of those. It takes the pressure off them having to make the decision. Most of the time people don't want to drink. They don't want to wake up with a bad head. But they feel like they have to because other people are, or because everyone else is. And anyone who doesn't want to drink that evening, just be the first to order a drink, because I'll guarantee you somebody, if not half the table, if not the whole table, will follow.
Yeah, social pressure is a real thing, for sure.
Yeah, and I just kind of coming onto the corporate events as well, like we're definitely seeing here in Asia a lot of them changing as well, you know, just making sure that there are non-alcoholic alternatives, or events are changing. Okay, you know, there's non-alcoholic cocktail making or, you know, options. So rather than everyone going to do a cocktail making class, it's like you can choose to do non-alc or alc. And actually, most of the time, people choose the non-alc. So it's, again, choice. And I think a lot of, you know, businesses will be really surprised about how many people make the choice to choose a non-alc option, especially in a work setting.
Yeah, and that goes across the board. So one of the events that I'm doing frequently is with a run club. And now, granted, I will say I only run when chased. I have no joy of running. I do not. That's not my jam. But I will say that I did, when I was in my mid-20s, go to a couple 5Ks. And I remember being done, and it always seemed like it ended up in a bar. And I used to remember thinking the last thing I wanted was a beer after doing that. Now, granted, again, I was not a runner, so 5K was hard for me. And I remember feeling like out of breath and exhausted. Again, I don't understand that idea of I just ran however many miles, let me drink beer now. That just doesn't make any sense to me. So this run club has me curating non-alcoholic cocktails for their run club afterwards. That makes sense to me. And I always am cognizant of what other ingredients are going in there that hopefully help replenish their systems, right? So stuff that is high, whatever, right? High vitamin, high
Electrolytes.
Thank you. Electrolytes, things like that. So I'm always trying to be cognizant of what ingredients go in there, so that way they are replenished and refreshed at the same time. Another event that I find has been really successful for me is doing, like you said, a mixology 101 class. And so I've been doing that for corporations, where some of the time I do it with alcohol, some I do without alcohol. I'm just completely non-alcoholic. In fact, my entire January was fully booked for non-alc mixology 101 classes throughout New York. And then some of the events that I'm going to be doing in February and I did last month were a mixture of both. So you had alc and non-alc so that everybody had a chance to have fun with it. And then the last one is retail. So I have done a couple events now in retail stores where it's during the middle of the afternoon. And so I don't think most people who are going shopping at a luxury clothing store or a luxury jewelry store or an art gallery is intending on getting, you know what, during their afternoon. So they may want to have a drink or just not have any alcohol. So they may want to just have a non-alcoholic cocktail while they shop. It's still creating an experience, whether you're inviting your VIP clientele to this or you're just trying to get more traffic to come in your store from outside with signage. Whatever the case may be, you're creating an environment where people are saying, wow, this is nice. I can have a drink while I look at my stuff and I go shopping. And again, these are luxury stores. So this isn't like you're going in there to spend $15 on a shirt. This is expensive stuff. And so I think most people want to make those decisions clear-headed as well. So again, it's a way to elevate an experience without the alcohol. So there's so many different ways the corporate inclusivity thing works.
I love that. And that's that was going to be kind of one of my last questions, which was, you know, for anyone listening who wants to advocate for inclusive drinking, what are some of the small and practical steps that they can take? And I think you've almost kind of just answered that in your last response, but anything else to add?
Yeah, hire me. No. So I would say that the truth is that the key is just being aware that an option should be presented and then put forth the effort to understand the why. I always go back to start with why. One of my heroes in life is Simon Sinek, who wrote Start With Why. That TED Talk changed how I viewed a lot of things, and then reading all his books has helped me really understand a lot about mindset and how we make our decisions from an emotional standpoint. And I think that if we start with why it's so important to have an inclusive environment when it comes to cocktails, wine, beer, corporate events, restaurants, whatever. As long as we understand the why, that there is a benefit to everyone, that's the key. And so when you start to understand that why, you can then put together the plan. So again, just to go back, if you're having a run club, the idea is to bring the people back, create an emotional connection to the run club organization, and give them something to take home with them that may be beneficial. So electrolytes, vitamins, whatever's in that non-alcoholic cocktail. If it's a luxury event and you want to bring in traffic or you want to say thank you to your VIP clientele, bringing them into an event and creating, again, an emotional connection to your location, your business, and giving them a little something that most people don't offer. Most people, I've never been to a store where I'm going shopping and they've said, would you like a cocktail? Like that's something that's rare. So it creates, again, an emotional connection of, I had a really good time while I did this. I go to a corporate event. I was able to talk to everyone. I was able to network with my coworkers, potentially try to move up the corporate ladder and have a good environment where I wake up and I don't feel nervous about what I said or nervous I made anybody mad at me or I did anything wrong. There's always a why to why this inclusivity thing benefits everyone. And that's the key, is just understanding the why.
I love that. It's a perfect way to close off this podcast. I feel like we could keep this going. There's so much more I did want to talk about with you. So maybe we do at some point a part 2.
Yes, I love part 2. Part 2 is better. It's always better. Godfather part 2, Empire Strikes Back. Part 2 is always better.
I love it. But really, thank you, Chris, for such an incredible conversation and just sharing your expertise and passion for creating a more inclusive, welcoming drinking culture. You've given me a lot to think about and actually quite a lot of practical ideas as well. And I'm hoping that we can kind of get people listening in from hospitality, from corporate, and then anyone who is just maybe a little bit sober curious and figuring out like what does inclusive drinking look like and how they can navigate that a little bit better.
Yeah. Thank you very much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Thanks. And then to everyone listening, I hope this episode has inspired you to rethink drinking culture, maybe what that looks like, and how you can play a role in making it more inclusive. So whether that means you're advocating for better non-alcoholic options, or you're even experimenting with elevated drinks at home, or just creating spaces where everyone feels welcome, there's actually loads and loads of positive impact to be had. I will link to all of Chris's their profiles and everything below. If you've got any questions for him, please reach out or comment, and we'll make sure he answers. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Leave us a review, subscribe. It all really, really helps. And yeah, thank you for tuning in. And as always, keep climbing and keep spiraling upwards. And I'll see you soon. Thanks.